everyone. This is Dr. Judy Shaw, and I'm with the Shaw Medical Travel Consultants and CEO of Shaw Medical Travel Consultants. And today we're going to be talking with Ms. Sonia Wynter. She is the founder and principal psychologist at Tea House Therapy in Kingston, Jamaica. She's a licensed clinical psychologist who holds a Bachelor of Science honors in computer science and accounting, and a Master of Science with distinction in clinical psychology from the University of West Indies. Ms. Wynter further pursued training in couples and premarital counseling from the Gottman Institute in Seattle, Washington. She has an extensive career in which includes functioning as a clinical therapist at the University of West Indies, Center of HIV and AIDS Research, subsequently at Mico Youth Counseling Resource and Development Center, in addition to positions with Psychiatry Department at the University Hospital in the West Indies. Contributing to her experience dealing with personal interactions prior to focusing in the field of psychology for 20 years, Ms. Wynter worked in the financial industry in Jamaica. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the impact of travel and relationships. So thanks, Ms. Wynter, for joining us to discuss this topic as it relates to the impact of travel on couples, particularly the couples who, the member of the couple rather, who is possibly left behind from the person who is traveling. So the question I have for you, the first question is, what is the impact generally on the person who is remaining behind of the person who is traveling frequently from home?
Yeah, the impact is connected or related to a number of variables. So being separated because there's travel is an additional stress to our relationship. Have stresses of different kinds that they go through, and having to be separated on a regular basis, that's stress that the couple has to deal with. That can either strengthen the relationship or undermine. The impact that it has, to be more specific in answering your question, would depend on how mature the relationship is. For example, has this couple been able to develop to a state where they're very comfortable and secure in their relationship? Is it a long-standing relationship? Is it a more casual relationship? Or is it a new relationship? Also, what has the couple done to compensate for the fact that they're going to be separated through travel? Those are some of the things that would determine what the impact is on the person who's left behind. Let's assume that this couple has not taken any particular steps to address the fact that travel is going to be a component of their relationship. Then quite often there's some really difficult emotions that can come up, such as feelings of abandonment and being left behind, feelings of isolation, and then feelings of resentment, having to just cope with whatever things at home, children, domestic responsibilities, planning, budgeting, financial responsibilities, having to deal with that, feeling like having to deal with that on your own can create a lot of sense of just being more isolated, even though you're in a couple, being resentful, and being a feeling of abandonment, like I didn't really sign up for this. And those feelings, depending on how you cope with them and deal with them, of course, can have a significant and destructive effect on the relationship.
Yeah. And so you mentioned it depends a lot on the nature of the relationship. If it's a new relationship, if it's an established relationship, or something of the nature. So are you suggesting that could have something to do maybe with their communication, the way that they interact with each other, the maturity of the relationship, not necessarily of the individuals, but of the relationship? Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, when I say mature, I mean that they have developed a mechanism of being able to communicate with each other about what things that affect them as individuals and things that affect them as a couple. They are able to they have not only communicate effectively, but they have a bank, like a database of knowledge and understanding of each other's anxieties, fears, Achilles heels, as it were. They have that knowledge already, that framework upon which they can build and interact going forward and deal with difficulties such as travel.
Right. And would you think that there is an impact more on the person who is left behind, or the person who is doing all the traveling and is away from that stable base? And where would you think the impact mostly lies, or maybe it's equal?
I think that the impact is different in that both people deal with different experiences. Okay, the person I've already outlined some of the emotional journey of the person left behind.
Right.
The experience of the person leaving will have similarities, but will also be different as well. You know, there's a feeling of being away so that they have an opportunity to almost focus on whatever it is that they are doing. You know, there is the need to having to feel like this always in transit sort of can be kind of destabilizing as well.
Yeah.
And create a stress in and of itself. There's the jet lag, there is and the toll that can exact on the physical well-being of the person.
Yeah.
But also what's similar is the feeling of just facing things on your own a lot of times. You know, particularly if the couple don't have a routine of connecting, they don't have a ritual of connecting so that they can share experiences. But typically it's much harder to be left behind.
Yeah.
Because the household and structure is often built around both people being there.
Yeah.
And because travel exerts or applies a stressor to the relationship, and the person leaving has a sense of escaping from that tension.
Yeah.
And not having to confront it on a day-to-day basis in the way that perhaps the person left behind just has to deal with that gaping hole in the routine and life of the family.
Got it. So I'm thinking then, maybe before, if this travel is going to be anticipated, or if the person who's traveling knows that they're going to be traveling for quite a while, I'm thinking then there may be some value in having a sit-down conversation, how we're going to address it. What would you suggest would be some of the tools or tips that a couple would benefit from?
I think that first of all, they have to be very deliberate about how they're going to cope with this reality that they face.
Yeah.
They're putting themselves at a disadvantage if they just go into it and hope for the best. Okay, it's very important to be deliberate about how you're going to interact. You know, to maybe do some research so that they understand the terrain that they're now entering into, and what each of them will face individually when they're separated, and what the relationship will face. So it's being aware of that, number one, such as watching, a podcast such as the one that you're now creating, and then being deliberate about what they're going to do about it, creating rituals for connection. Okay, a very important thing, because the thing about it is, a lot of couples, as I said earlier, travel is just another stressor that couples deal with.
Yeah.
And the success of any relationship really hinges on how do you face stressors together. Mm-hmm. And similarly, the couple has to decide how they're going to face this stress of travel together. However, it's also important that they be flexible, because they're going to try different mechanisms and they may or may not work. They have to be willing to try something new or modify, or so that they, they're changing their compensating mechanisms, let's call it that, as they discover what travel is doing to their relationship and what their new needs are because of the reality that they're facing.
You think that's great information, so helpful. I'm wondering if it seems to me though that when you are embarked as a couple, when you're embarking on this issue of traveling one traveling, one left behind, that each individual is probably going to have a good sense of self, because maybe if you're left behind, for example, maybe you're going to be alone often, and maybe that's not something you're used to. So,
or maybe something more often, maybe it's something that you really fear, and they really have a paralyzing experience. You know, people who have experienced abandonment by caregivers in their early developmental history, for example, don't deal with being abandoned very well. It creates a tremendous amount of distress that impairs their ability to deal with the relationship and with other stressors. That you know, that's quite often what happens. You know, how we left behind is often a hurdle for many people to get together.
So, I mean, it seems that there would have to be some couples discussion, how we're going to communicate, and some of the tips that you mentioned, but also some personal, maybe counseling, or some personal research as to, okay, so how am I personally going to address my feelings of feeling abandoned? I mean, I would think people can sometimes get depressed or maybe even anxious, one end of the, whichever end of the spectrum. So I'm thinking that you can certainly go through some psychological issues, and it seems to be somewhat important. It would be very important.
And here's the thing, quite often, you know, it is stress that helps us to recognize things about ourselves that we weren't aware of. You know, it's stress that quite shows up, you know, the personal, emotional challenges that we have. What we're talking about here in terms of abandonment and so on, we're really talking about this psychological notion of attachment. You know, how do we attach and deal with connection, and how do we deal with a connection with another person when that connection is under stress? You know, do we panic? Do we have a meltdown? Do we shut down and not connect and not communicate? That quite often happens, you know. And all of these are coping mechanisms that we learn from very early in our life that now come to bear on adulthood. And for so many of us, it's only when we go through a stress, when we go through continued experiences of stress and difficulty, that we come face to face and have to confront these components of our psyche, as it were.
Right.
Were prior to this hidden from us.
Yeah. And so do you think you alluded to, so in communication, do you think the value of having some kind of routine, okay, at 6 o'clock every day, we're going to talk, or some kind of establish a routine, as opposed to, well, when I get a break from a meeting, I'll call you or something like that. So is there value in that?
Absolutely. So, but guess what, Dr. Shaw? There's value in having those, I call it the Gottman Institute and the Gottman approach to couples therapy calls it rituals of connection.
Yes.
Okay. And rituals of connection are important whether you're traveling or not.
Yes. Okay.
It's a mechanism that really strengthens the foundation of the connection between two people in an intimate relationship, number one. And then, of course, for the couple who are separated by travel, rituals of connection are even more important. It's almost like an antiseptic, as it were, or a prophylactic, to use your language, to help them cope with what's going to happen. Now, rituals of connection. Now, what I often find, though, is that because couples don't think that they'll be able to satisfy whatever connect ritual they agree to 100% of the time, they're unwilling to even commit.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So, like, you know, for instance, you know, a couple might consider meeting at 8 o'clock every night, and so often one party or the other will say, well, I can't commit to that because it's going to happen for 3 nights, and then it's not going to happen, or I can't determine when I'll be in transit, or I can't determine when my meetings will be over. So 8 o'clock's just not, my life is so unstable that I cannot commit to any particular time.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of all or nothing approach. You know, I like to, and so I always encourage couples, look, make a commitment. Commitment is about trying to do your best no matter what happens. Commitment is about when you fall off the wagon, you get on and you try again.
Right. Okay. Got it.
Just because you can't do it 100% of the time doesn't mean you don't commit.
Yeah.
Okay. You might get it 50% of the time, but that 50% of the time will be valuable in terms of your connection.
Yeah.
So that's something important that I often notice as well, and then what you do in that time is very important.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, there are two things. First of all, there will be things that are happening between the couple. There will be tensions taking place that are relationship related.
Okay.
That they'll have to address and talk
as a result of the travel, maybe, or maybe something just deep seated previous.
As a result of the travel, as a result of anything.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, how I feel about this relationship, as a result of how I feel about how you're interacting with me, about what. So that will be one thing. But then there'll also be stressors related that are outside of the relationship that I face as I go out into the world, as I connect. So those are extra relationship stress. Okay. So it's very important to make time to discuss both.
Yes.
And keep them separate also. Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful intervention that the Gottman Institute often is called stress reducing conversation.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And Google it, it's Gottman, stress reducing conversation. And what that means is where two people sit down, no distractions. It's about us talking about things outside of our relationship, the stresses that we're both facing. And it's a ritual which has a very well-defined format where you have a speaker and a listener. And the point of this conversation is not problem solving. It's simply sharing. Okay? It's simply the speaker saying, this is what I faced today. This is how I felt about what I faced. This is what I'm worried about. This is what I'm intimidated about. This is what I feel good about.
Yeah.
And simply sharing, whilst the other person does nothing but listen. And by that I mean, of course, actively listen. Ask questions, not problem solving.
Yes.
Just connecting over the stress of one person. Caring, empathizing, validating, sharing the side up, and then switching roles.
Mm-hmm.
Reinforce the fact that this is your friend that you're talking to. This is the person I share things with. This is the person that I can be vulnerable with. I can be vulnerable with, because this person is not going to judge me. They're not going to say, you shouldn't be like that. What's the problem? Or you need to think about this. The person is taking the stance first and foremost of, I want to know you. I want to know what things were like for you today.
Yes.
And that's a wonderful ritual that can be incorporated into any relationship, couples or not, but also couples who travel or not. That really can strengthen the connection between people and helps. I'm going to stick with that word. It's a prophylactic.
Yes, absolutely.
To dealing with stresses that are sure to come.
Yeah.
Wow. And then let me keep going. And then that's one ritual that's important for all couples to integrate into their interaction with each other. There's also just having an attitude of gratitude all the time, where human beings have this tendency to we're quicker to identify things that aren't going right in the world around us and in our relationships as well. And for many, many couples, they can end up talking to each other only about what's not going right, either in the relationship or in the other person. Yeah. And that can become a very caustic soda to the connection with you. Because if every time we talk about things, the only thing you have to say to me is what I'm not doing right or how I'm failing, then losing my friend almost. I'm not going to be willing to be vulnerable anymore, and so on. Yeah. So the antidote to that is when each partner is on the lookout for opportunities to validate and encourage and show gratitude to the other person. That's really a friendship building mechanism where one couple can always say to one person can always say to the other, I noticed you did this today, and I thought that was really courageous of you. Or you said this, you noticed this today, and I just so supported, and I appreciate you for that. the attitude of gratitude and showing appreciation and validating each other is a
Like
habit,
that.
a habit very important in, again, building the friendship, so that it's almost like the foundation of your friendship is sturdy, as it
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
But the onslaught that this travel and separation can create.
Yeah.
So that's another ritual, which is more of a habit, I like to say, that couples should often try to incorporate in their relationship with each other, and do it regularly. You know, it's
Yeah.
one of the most profound relationship building skills that couples can take on.
Wow. That's very, I mean, I'm sort of blown away with some of these ideas. I mean, it seems like they work with regular couples, but it's something that you really have to work on when you add the stress of the travel. You know, especially even now with coronavirus and all the various different other issues that we have to go through as it relates to traveling and safely, at least safely. And that adds another concern that everybody wants to make sure that their partner is returning safe or is going to be safe when the traveler comes back home.
And you know, that's something that I'm noticing a lot with couples too. What's creating, so it's like there are two layers of stressors. The fact that one person is more exposed to the virus than the other, that differential creates a stressor. But also what I'm noticing that's very interesting is there's often too a differential between how the couple's sense of safety and having to be cautious about and protective of themselves and the family. And so one person in the couple might be more vigilant about mask wearing or hand washing or socializing than the other. You know, the other might be a little bit more laissez-faire, and that differential is creating a tremendous amount of tension in relationships, because what you're talking about is an existential question, right? For individuals and for family, for children as well. And so I'm noticing that's creating that difference in approach, which is maybe even a personality difference that is now coming to bear, brought to the fore because of this virus, and how we deal with it as two different people. And each other also is a problem. You know, I'm judging you because you're too uptight about this virus, or I'm judging you because you're too laissez-faire about it. That differential in attitudes towards protection and coronavirus precautions is really creating a lot of difficulty for couples as well.
Yeah. Very important. I mean, because coronavirus is going to be with us for a while now. So I'm hearing then, so, you know, to sort of wrap this up a little bit, so I'm hearing then, so certainly we need to work on we need to work on ourselves individually. We need to have a sense of our ability to handle abandonment and how we feel about attachment. Maybe, I mean, that's not something we think about regularly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's so I'm hearing that if part of the couple if one part of the couple is planning on starting a lot of traveling for work or what have you, then this kind of individual revelation, I think sounds to me, based on what you're telling me, is a good thing. And then starting to have conversations. Do you suggest maybe getting a therapist or counselor? Is that a good idea? I mean, especially if this traveling is going to be a long-term thing. I mean, if it's just part of the job. I mean, do you suggest that?
Well, full disclosure, I can't help but seize an opportunity to plug for couples therapy. Okay.
Go ahead.
Therapy in itself is an antiseptic for crisis, because the couples that are most successful and are most satisfied with their relationship are not those who had lesser stress or tragedy or tensions in their life or even their relationship. It's those couples who learn mechanisms to deal with and confront these difficulties together. Those are couples that have. So on the threshold of any particular difficulty, right? There's always much to be gained from therapy. There's a lot of self-discovery to be gained from therapy, and there's a lot, and a relationship is one of the best avenues that can teach you about yourself, because it's only when it's almost like you're thrown into a weightlifting competition, and that's when you know how much,
you can, that's a great analogy.
exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
You know, or you even know which muscles are stronger and which are weaker, you know, that sort of a thing. And so a relationship creates one of the most fertile grounds for self-discovery, because it places tensions on the individual, that forces them to introspect, number one, but then at the same time can give you a higher calling, because I so much want this relationship to work. Am I willing to work on what my things are, you know? And do the best I can for myself, so that I can be good to myself and good to the other person as well. That's the formula for a healthy relationship, you know? And so therapy at any juncture is always a great thing.
Yes. And lastly, I think too, the importance of at least empathy, maybe empathy. Would you say that they're, you know, because the one may not know what the other one is feeling, and the one who's traveling has all the luxury of traveling. I mean, granted, if it's business, it may not be luxury, but, you know, has that, as you mentioned, it's going away, and so has that sort of sojourn, so to speak. But it's important, I think, that each individual should try to understand what the other may be going through. You think?
Yeah. Here's the thing, and yes, and that is a good description of empathy. The thing about it is, though, is that empathy can only come out of effective communication. So I can only empathize with you if I know how to express what I'm feeling without condemning you in some way, or criticizing you. So how I communicate my experience to you is a factor in how empathetic the listener can be, right? Then also how actively and effectively can the listener hear what's being said without taking personal responsibility for what the person is saying. How can I also hear what's said and what's not said, but implied, and validate, check, you know, confirm, you know, this is what I think I'm hearing. Did I hear you right? So this is all part of active listening, and and what I'm defining, I guess, is effective communication. So empathy is harder where there's so many unknowns, which ineffective communication can create a lot of unknowns. You know? So empathy is important, but to get to empathy is a journey.
Right. Communication starts first. Got it. This has been great. I've learned a lot. And our listeners, this has been very valuable. Our listeners especially know that, well, maybe not know, but maybe by the end of the year, or maybe even the next year, travel may start on a more regular basis. And so these things are going to become more commonplace. You know, and so I think this is going to be so valuable. It's such great information. And I do want to thank you for being available to have this conversation with us. We're going to place as well some information as to how to reach Miss Sonia Wynter, and whether you're in Jamaica or whether you're outside of Jamaica, right? So you can still reach her. She's available. And to discuss this or any other issues with regards to relationship building, relationship issues with the relationship. So I'm going to ask the viewers, subscribe to our channel, and also give us an opinion of what you think of this interview. And also remember, my name is Dr. Judy Shaw, and this is Sonia Wynter, who is a clinical psychologist out of Jamaica. Our company is Shaw Medical Travel Consultants. So again, thank you, Ms. Wynter, for the time and the conversation.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to reach so many couples across the globe.
Okay. And please stay tuned and listen to some of our other videos that we have on our YouTube channel, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have other similar interviews coming up, which will be very informational. And very useful. Thanks again, and